So does your Bobcat have a timing belt? Well, if you own an 863, an 873, an 883, an 864, which was Bobcat's first track machine, an A300, or even a T250, the earlier A300s and T250s all used a Deutz 4-cylinder turbocharged oil-cooled engine, and those Deutz engines do have a timing belt. A lot of people don't even know the timing belt is in this engine, but Bobcat recommends we change this timing belt every 3,000 hours or every 5 years, whichever comes first. Some people do it sooner. Yeah, it's up to you. But we want to inspect it, you know, at least every 500 hours, every 1,000 hours. Let's take a look at this belt and see if there's any cracking, any fraying, or soaked in oil or grease. And we might want to change that a little sooner than that 3,000 hours, because this Deutz engine is an interference engine. If the timing belt breaks, we're going to bend some push rods, and we're probably going to bend some bolts on the rocker bridge up there. And it's possible more damage can occur, but usually on these engines, when this belt does break, that's all we do is bend like 4 push rods and bend a couple bolts every now and then in that rocker bridge. I've seen it go both ways. But today this is just preventative maintenance. The belt did not break. This beautiful 873 that I just picked up a while back is going to be for sale, and I like to go through, change all the filters, all the fluids, fix any leaks, do all the service, and timing belt is part of that service. And this is a fairly easy job, and if you know what you're doing, but that's why I'm kind of doing a video, just show you a couple tips and tricks on how to do this job. It's not hard at all. And it's just a peace of mind, because we don't want this belt to break, because then it's going to cost you a lot more time and money. So let's get right to it. Of course, before we start the job, we have to order our parts, right? So we're going to order the timing belt. It comes in a kit. You get a timing belt, a new tensioner pulley, and a new bolt for that tensioner pulley. Now we're also going to need a couple of special tools. And usually when you buy, I'm going to leave a link for this belt kit in the description. It's going to come with these two, these are our lock pins. We have to lock out our camshaft and our crankshaft. And these are just 2 pins that we're going to insert into the engine, one from the front side and one from the back side, one to lock the cam, one to lock the crank. But the kits usually will come with these pins. You can buy it with or without the pins, but yes, you will need them. The other thing we're going to need is, this is going to be hard to see. I'll give you a little close up here in just a second, but this is a 5-star Torx. It's called a Torx Plus with like a security hole in the center. There is one screw in the timing belt cover that's going to take this special bit, and I'm also going to leave a link in the description where you get these belts, or these bits off of Amazon. Just this one is a number 30 Torx Plus, but you can buy just a strip of these on Amazon for relatively cheap. And the other thing you're going to need is a belt tension gauge. Now this gauge is kind of hard to find. They're kind of expensive, but there are other belt tensioning gauges. I'll leave a link in the description for those as well. But they're kind of going to work about the same way as this belt tension gauge, but it's important that we get the right tension on this belt when we set our tensioner pulley. So these are the special tools you'll need. They're easy to come by. Everything else is just kind of general hand tools. So let's get to the engine and go ahead and start tearing this down real quick. So I always start this process by tearing down the front of the engine, and I'm going to start by loosening up the alternator and getting the alternator belt out of the way. And then we're going to kind of jam the camera in down from the side here and take a look at the front of the engine. And this is kind of difficult to film, and really the only reason I do these videos is to help you out. Definitely not in it for the money. So if you would just give me a thumbs up, or hell, I don't care, even a thumbs down, because it helps. I ain't worried about the algorithm or money or any of that. It just helps me know what you guys like. Do you like the more general maintenance type videos, or do you like the more technical engine rebuilds and hydraulic motor rebuilds, pump rebuilds, stuff like that? It seems like a lot of people like kind of the general maintenance side. So either way, just give me a little feedback of what you like. Now let's jump down in here and see if we can kind of see the front of this engine. So now we're going to remove this front cover, 2 10mm bolts. and it's going to be that inside this hole right here is going to be that Torx Plus bit that I was talking about. Now our Torx bit, you can see on there, that's the little 5-star bit that I was talking about. And we'll go right in this hole. And take that screw out. And now we can remove this front cover. And this is the cover that we'll want to remove to kind of inspect our belt. And this one's really loose. I can see some outside wear on it. This is probably the original belt. This machine has about 3,800 hours on it. So now I want to take this pulley off, and we're going to take the 4 bolts around the pulley off. We do not want to loosen the crank bolt right here, just the 4 to knock this pulley off. And on this model, I've got an oil cooler hose or tube that's kind of right in the way. Kind of makes it a little difficult to get these out. And then our pulley comes right out. And now I can take out the rest of the bolts around the front cover here and get the rest of the front cover off. And there's the rest of the front cover. Okay, now that we got the front of the engine taken apart, now we've got access to the timing belt, it's time to go ahead and pin our engine, lock it into place. Now, one pin, if you can see kind of right here below, kind of to the left of the oil filter, we're going to use a 10mm and we're going to remove this plug out of the engine block. And this is going to give us access to our camshaft. Sometimes some oil will leak out of that hole if the engine has recently run. And just note that there is a copper washer on this plug. Just make sure you don't lose that. Now I can look through this hole and I can physically see where the pin is going to drop into the camshaft. So I'm going to take my wrench, put it on my crankshaft, and I'm going to turn the engine over until I see that spot in the cam where my pin goes in. Rolling around. Okay, it's right there. Then I take my pin tool, and you can see it has threads on it too. And we're going to slide it right in there. Kind of bump the crankshaft back and forth until that drops all the way in. And then using my my flathead screwdriver, and we are going to screw this in to the block, and that's going to lock our camshaft into position. Okay, it doesn't have to be tight, we just want it to bottom out. Now our camshaft is locked. So now we need to go to the other side of the engine and lock the crankshaft. So it's going to be the same thing on the back side of this motor. You can see right below the turbo, this is the front, the camshaft, or the crank. And again, we've got another plug, just like the one we just removed for the camshaft. Now we're going to remove this one for the crankshaft. Again, we want to make sure that copper washer is on our plug. We don't want to lose that. And using my pin, we're going to screw it in to the engine block. Just screwing it in by hand. I just want to make sure it bottoms out on the block. We need to make sure that's bottomed out because our crankshaft is going to back up to that pin and touch it. And that's where we know that our crankshaft is pinned in the correct spot. Okay, now that I've got my crankshaft pinned, I like to take this camshaft pin back out of the engine. And what I want to do is I want to feel that my my crankshaft is actually coming up and hitting that pin on the inside. So before I try to turn the engine over with the wrench, I want to remove this plug out of the camshaft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my wrench and I'm going to kind of bring the engine counterclockwise just a little bit. Then I'm going to go clockwise, and I can feel that good solid hit where the crankshaft is hitting the pin. The pin doesn't actually go in the hole. I'll put a little diagram up here for you. It does not actually go into a hole in the crankshaft. The crankshaft journal is kind of rolling up and just hitting the pin. So the crankshaft can roll this way, but it's going to be deadheaded against this pin in the clockwise, going clockwise, I guess, position. So now that I confirmed it is hitting that pin solid, now I can put my pin back in the camshaft, and that way we know we're completely locked out and we can go ahead and take our timing belt off. Again, not super tight, we just want this just bottomed out right to the bottom of the block. Alright, now that I've got my pins in and my engine's locked out, it's time to take off the tensioner pulley and the timing belt itself. So using my wrench, we're going to put in the bolt of the tensioner and back that bolt out. And here's our old timing belt. So my next step is we've got to loosen the cam pulley here. See, this cam pulley is not notched or pinned or anything to the camshaft. It's just being held to the cam via friction. And the reason we loosen this up because we want this gear to spin. Now the camshaft's not going to spin, just the timing gear, so that when we put the belt on and we tension it, it'll kind of find its home, and then we'll lock it back into place, and that'll keep us into time. Now, I'm using an 1 3/8 wrench or a 33 millimeter, and then a 22 millimeter we're going to use to break this nut loose. Now, it's important that we hold this wrench tight because we don't want to be pushing down on that camshaft, right, with this pin in there, because we could damage our cam, or we could break that pin off. So it's important that we hold this wrench on that nut to keep from, you know, torquing that, because we got to hold the cam and break the bolt loose. So let's see if we can do that without too much trouble. Oh. Okay. So now that we're loose, see how that the camshaft gear will just spin now on the camshaft. So let's get our new belt. And tensioner, and we just got to watch this bolt down here, that when we put our pulley on, our pulley, see how the pulley could hit that bolt right there? We just want to make sure we orient that pulley so it's not hitting that bolt right there. It'll damage our pulley when we try to torque this down. So just be aware of this is going to be in your way. I mean, it's not when you're oriented correctly, but just make sure we don't tighten down on top of that. So the tensioner is going to kind of roll down in this position when we kind of put our belt on, but I'll kind of hold it up at the 12 o'clock position. I can get my belt around the crankshaft, and then we'll just kind of let that roll well and around so we can get the rest of the belt on. Now I got the belt kind of wrapped around that. I'll let that pulley roll back around in that direction. Again, being mindful for our bolt down here that we don't get the pulley on top of that. Then I'm going to kind of move the belt over. You can see, usually we should measure this, but you can see where it was tracking in the old belt line. And that's right where I want to put that, so that we make sure that it tracks evenly all the way around. And now we're ready to install our tensioner here on the back side of the belt. What I'm doing on the tension gauge, I'm looking for 3.5 is where I want to put that. And now that I've got the gauge at 3.5, I'm going to go ahead and lock down my tensioner pulley. And then verify that it did stay at 3.5. All right, now I can remove my gauge. And now that we've got the proper tension on the belt, now I can re-torque my cam gear. In order to do that, first thing I want to do is, again, using my wrench to hold this outside, you know, I guess the locking mechanism. We are going to torque this bolt to 22 foot-pounds. Okay, so now that we've got it done at 22 foot-pounds, we're going to put a mark on it where it sits, and then I'm going to mark it at 210 degrees. So 22 foot-pounds plus 210 degrees. So if I kind of put my mark at 12 o'clock, (210 degrees) is going to be about this position right here. So that's where I want my nut to come back around to that 210 degree mark. Again, remembering that we have this engine pinned, okay? I'm going to take this a little bit tighter, but before I get that full 210 degrees, I'm going to unpin my engine, because the pulley's going to be locked in place. It's not going to move on the camshaft once I tighten it down a little bit more. But if this wrench or this one were to slip while I'm trying to put that final torque on there with these pins in, again, we could damage our cam crank or the pins inside the engine, and we don't want to do any damage. So I'm actually going to back them out before I do my final hard torque on this. So now I can unpin the camshaft. And go ahead and finish torquing this. And now that I got both my pins out, I want to go ahead and put in my plug for the camshaft as well. Now we're going to go ahead and turn this engine over 4 times in the clockwise position. So let me make a mark on my camshaft here, or my crankshaft, I'm sorry. And we'll count the rotations. And what we're doing is we're kind of getting our belt set, and then we're going to put the tension gauge back on it, and it's actually going to tighten up. We set the gauge at 3.5 after rotating the engine 4 times, and everything kind of gets set in. We're going to expect that tension now to be between 6.5 and 9, somewhere in that area, just to make sure we got the right tension. Okay, so that was 4 complete revolutions. So now I want to put my tensioner back on there and double check the tension on this belt. Perfect. That's about a 7.5, and that's where I want to be. Between 6.5 and 9 is the spec. So it did kind of tighten up as we turned that engine over. So now I know I've got the correct tension on the timing belt. And so I was also watching the belt, make sure everything's tracking correctly on the pulleys, and everything looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting all the covers back on. Now that I've got the front of the engine all put back together, we can put our alternator belt back on. And tighten our alternator. Now that I'm all cleaned up, it's time to let the cab back down, fire it off, and it's gonna be fine. But it's always, you kind of get it in your gut, you know, after doing a timing belt. Oh gosh, what if something went wrong? But I feel like we're pretty good on this one. Let's get the cab down and fire it off. Little glow plug. 3, 2, 1. Contact. Beautiful. Sounds amazing. I love these Deutz engines. I really do. Some people hate them, but I just love the robust robust reliability, the nice deep tone, the hint of smoke, that wonderful smell that comes from these engines. Oh, kind of nerding out a little bit here, but absolutely love it. So job well done on the timing belt. So now that our timing belt's done, let's talk about a couple other things on this Deutz engine that you may or may not know. First of all, this is a 4-cylinder rated at 73 horsepower, and it's oil cooled, which means there's no antifreeze, there's no coolant that runs through this motor. It uses engine oil through these tubes to go up through a big cooler, and it has a fan that blows through that cooler just like a radiator, but it's engine oil that's being cooled, and that's what keeps this engine cool. No coolant, no antifreeze, just engine oil. Also, we're used to the cylinder orientation from the front of the engine to the rear end of the engine, where we would kind of be used to it being 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Being that this is the bell housing or the flywheel side. The Deutz is just opposite. At the front of the motor, it actually starts with cylinder number 4. 4, 3, 2, 1 on the flywheel side. Of course, these are your injection pumps. Injection nozzles actually go in down through the head. One other thing I want to talk about is this is the fuel lift pump. This is what kind of pulls the fuel from the engine through the filter and feeds the injection pumps. Now, these pumps are known to go bad, okay? But first thing that we can check if we're sure we're getting fuel up to here, but the engine's still dying, we're still having problems. What a lot of people don't know is that in the end of this cap right here, with a Phillips head screwdriver, we can pull this cap off, and there's an internal screen inside of here. And that screen sometimes gets full of trash or algae or whatever's in your tank gets clogged in that screen, so it can't actually push the fuel up to your injection pump. So we can just pull that out, and just be careful because there is an O-ring on the outer side and an O-ring on the inside of that screen. And we just don't want to lose those O-rings, but we can clean that screen out, put it back together, and run it. Now, again, every 3,000 hours, I'm probably going to go ahead and put a new pump on this. You know, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Because just like the timing belt, it wasn't broke, but we know that eventually there could be a problem that'll cause an issue down the road. And these pumps do cause issues. What would you see? Well, let's say you were getting fuel into your engine, right? That could mean the bladder is leaking, allowing fuel to bypass the pump and drop right into the crankcase and get actually diesel fuel into our engine oil, and it would cause our level to go up and thin out our oil and wash out our engine possibly. Also, it can leak the other way. Engine oil can come through the bladder, pump through our fuel system back to tank, and it can turn our fuel black. A lot of people don't realize that. They're like, well, why is my fuel black? And everyone's treating algae problems and all this other stuff, and the pump is still moving fuel, but that engine oil is getting back into it. And that's another thing. Where's my engine oil going? I don't see any leaks. Well, it's pumping it through your fuel system back into your fuel tank, and it turns your fuel black. So it's not an algae problem or contamination issue. Well, I guess it is contamination, but it's actually engine oil coming from your pump. So it's not a bad idea to, when you do that, when you do the timing belt, probably go ahead and throw a lift pump on there. It won't hurt. I'm going to go ahead and do it on this engine. Okay, another thing to look out for on these Deutz engines, which is really important, is to pull your dipstick out. Let me grab a rag here. Okay, early on these dipsticks, see these little ribs right here? These ribs are on the early dipsticks, and what would happen is these ribs will break off and they'll drop down in the engine, and they will actually get in the oil passageway and starve the engine for oil, and it can actually take an engine out just because of these ribs. So now we can buy a new dipstick. They're, I don't know, $30, $30, $40, that does not have these ribs on it. But I don't have one available right now, and it seals with an O-ring up here on top. So I'm going to take my pliers or my razor blade, and I'm actually going to cut these ribs off, and that'll guarantee me that one of these will not break off into the engine and cause future problems down the road. Other than that, general maintenance on this Deutz engine is all you have to do. They're very reliable, robust engines. I absolutely love them. So with that being said, again, thanks for watching. If that helped at all, please just a thumbs up. You know, if you subscribe, great. I'll never ask you to or beg you to subscribe, but a thumbs up goes a long way. It helps me know what kind of videos you like to see in the future. But any questions, please let me know, and thanks for watching.